I was born in Muscogee, Oklahoma, which is the capital of the Muscogee-Creek Nation of Oklahoma. And my great-great-grandfather was Principal Chief Melba Checote-Eads. And he walked the Trail of Tears as a child. And so that has always been the main thought in my family and in my life. And so my dad, like I said, took me to the Navy. My mother, we were in the Navy, and so I was a Navy brat. And so the military was probably a big, important part of my family. But my mother's non-Indian and my daddy is Indian. And we spent all of our time coming back to Muscogee to visit family, both my mother and my dad's family in Oklahoma. And so that is my early childhood, and that, you know, I don't think people, when you're in a I guess they call it biracial marriage now, or family, I guess you don't really as a child, you don't realize what that is. And of course, when I was little, they never said that. I never heard that until I got much older. And so, you know, so we have that idea today. And of course, today, people probably would have been able to talk about that more. But my dad's family, Indian family, and my mother's family is non-Indian. So I had two worlds that I've walked in all of my life. And so I hope, so yes, my heritage, my Native American Indian heritage, as a Muscogee woman today, has always been important.
And what would you say, were there any sort of like stories or traditions that you learned about from your father?
Well, you know, daddies don't always tell you everything. I used to ask him when I was little, and we got our first television. This is dating me, you know. This isn't the day where everybody didn't have a television. And we got our first television, and my favorite show was Red 1010, and of course Fort Apache and Apache Indians. I said to them, I said to my daddy, I said, what kind of Indians are we? And he'd say, you're Muscogee, you're Creek. And I'm thinking, Muscogee, I'm Creek. And then I'd say, well, Dad, why can't we be some of these cool Indians like the Apaches? And he'd just laugh. He'd say, he said, you're a Creek girl, you're Hokie, you're not going to be Apache. And I said, well, when will I know about that? He said, don't worry, you'll learn. And so my thought was, because I never asked my dad, my thought was, well, if you don't tell me, how will I learn? I guess he just expected me to learn those cultural ways. But so that was the early onset of who are my identity, that I thought I could, because he was Indian, we could just be any Indian we wanted to be. And I told him that nobody knew who we were. I said, nobody knows who the Muscogee-Creek people are. And he was like, he just laughed. He said, well, they do, and one day you'll know too. And I'm thinking, okay, well, you better tell me then.
So when did you talked about, did you say it was your great-grandfather who walked in the Trail of Tears?
He would be my two greats,
great-great-grandfather.
Yes. And he was, interestingly enough, not this weekend, but last weekend, I had been to the Trail of Tears conference in Alabama, and I was talking to an author who just wrote several books about the creek removal, and I went to buy his book, and I was telling him, you know, who my grandfather, and he said his name, and I just stood there kind of amazed, and he said, well, I put him in the book. I said, well, for sure I need to buy your book then, because we'll see it in print. But you know, when you are known in history, it's a whole lot easier to find somebody than if you were looking. And that would be like my grandfather's mother's mother. She died when he was 6 years old, and his father had died when he was a baby, so he was an orphan. And we knew her name, his mother's mother, would be his grandmother. Well, I knew her name, and I knew my grandmother's name, but we never knew them, and of course he didn't know. So a friend of mine had given me some printed out removal records for the Creek people. She said, well, I'm not doing research on the Creeks, I'm doing Cherokees, and here's some Creek removal records, would you like them? And I said, oh, sure. So it was about an inch thick, and we built a house and moved to Woodbury, which is where I live now. And so got these records. I was reading through them one cold day in front of the fire. I said, okay, well, I want to read these things because I never had a chance to read them. And as I looked, I had some that I wasn't reading on the floor. And then the ones I was reading, I looked down on the floor and I see my grandmother's name. I said, oh my goodness, Eliza Checote, heir. So I followed the page across, and there was her mother on a removal record, and the year, and then her statement that when she got into Oklahoma Indian Territory. And so that was like gold to find that. And I wasn't even looking for it, and I had it all those years in my possession and had no clue. But that was really interesting because he was an orphan. This was his, and we're matrilineal. So this was his mother's line. This was his line. And so that was his tribal town, Big Spring. And so it was just such a find to see her on the removal record. And because these were, even though we knew their names, we didn't know anything about them. So then it started a new process for me. I knew she had been, his mother had been a school teacher for the tribe. And so I already knew that history. You know, you'll know things about your family, but to find them, you know, and here we go with archives and with historical facts. I mean, you know the story and you know the story is true, but when you find evidence of that story, it brings it to life. So I had a cousin that was working in cultural preservation at the tribe. And so I went over and I said, well, I want to find some stuff of my grandmother. And so we started looking, and he said, well, look here, here's her pay stub. Mm-hmm. This is a copy of her pay document. And it was looked like a check. And it was signed by my great-great-grandfather because he was the principal chief. So he signed her pay. And she was the mother of his first grandchild, which was my grandfather. Mm-hmm.
Wow. You said you were born in Oklahoma. How did you end up in Tennessee?
Well, that's a long story because I met my husband in Texas. And so we got married, and I always say he's a gypsy because he loves this move around. And so we ended up, he took a job in Oklahoma, so we went back to Oklahoma, which was wonderful. We lived right near Tulsa in Broken Arrow. And then he took another job, we went back to Texas. Then he took a job, we went to Virginia. Then he came to Nashville to be a songwriter, which was, it still might pan out, but I'm not going to hold my breath. So anyway, so we ended up here in Tennessee, and he is from Tennessee. He's from Bristol area. So for him, he wanted to come back here, and for me, we were passing through on our way back to Oklahoma or Texas, and we got as far as here. We never went any further. So we've been here since 1993. So now that my grandbabies are here, I doubt we're leaving. You know, we're going to stay here.
Yeah.
So I received a call from the Lord in the ministry. That was kind of amazing. I went home for the sesquicentennial of the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, which is a Methodist, all Indian churches Methodist conference. in Oklahoma. And so my Indian church is Newtown, and that's in Creek would be Melba Checote-Eads. And so I went home to be with my aunt and cousins and family for this big event of the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. At that time, I think we had 92 Indian churches. In these years, it has shrunk. And I'm not really sure, 80-something churches. So we are losing those churches. We are losing that history. Very important history. And of course, we're talking about the 5 tribes and Western tribes too, because Kiowas and other natives. But essentially, the 5, what was called in those days the 5 civilized tribes, which would be the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminoles, and the Muscogee people, would be the 5 tribes that were removed. Ethnic cleansing of the Southeast and removed to Oklahoma with the Removal Act 1830. So that history in my advocacy kind of came through being on boards and agencies within the United Methodist Church, and I was on the Native American Caucus of the church, and I was also on the Native American Center, which is called the United Methodist Native American Center at the School of Theology in Claremont, California. So I sat on that board. So I spent about 12 years on boards, traveling around, learning things that I never thought I would learn. And advocacy was part of the caucus. Caucus are part of the arm of the church for ethnic peoples in legislations and moves to help justice issues within the church. So that's where I became an advocate. And oh my goodness, it was a big thing. And just recently I attended the Parliament of World Religion, and it was held in Canada. I just got back Tuesday. Just got back from there. It was amazing, amazing, amazing. And I was a speaker with another lady, and we spoke on the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is from the Pope of the time when, 1492 is when Columbus supposedly discovered America. And in his discovery, of course, here's where the conflict comes. He says he discovered these people. And of course, so they looked to the Pope at that time to save from all the countries, Portugal, Spain, England, all these countries that were going out in the world and discovering places. Well, every place they went, the land conquest, they wanted the land. They wanted any gold, any commodity that they might find on that land. They wanted it to belong to their country. So the papal bulls, the papal meaning from the Pope, his writings, his authority, his law to keep them from fighting with each other, he wrote out these papal bulls. These were documents that led to the ability of Columbus to be able to say, I discovered this land, and everything on this land that I've discovered, once I put my flag down, will belong to the country of origin that I'm being paid to discover this for. And so then there began a lot of discussion about the people. And one of these, or somewhere along the line, they had to ask the Pope, what about these, are these people? They're brown and we're not sure. Now you know they knew, but they wanted clarification. Then the next question was, are these people, do they have a soul? And we're talking religion here, we're talking about eternity. If they have a soul, And if we subdue them, domineer them, you know, if we have to kill them and they have a soul, then what did we do to them? We put them immediately to eternal where? Hell. So here was, I come from the Bible Belt, so I'm not really into Catholic doctrine, but this is the kind of just overall of that idea. The idea was that they need permission. If they have a soul, then they can't kill them until they've had an opportunity to evangelize, to bring them into the Christian faith of some sort. You know, and of course if they refuse, then you can just kill them anyway, you know, because then they were pagans and not worthy to be saved.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where this was going. So getting back to today's time and the conversation I had with Steve Newcomb and others was, why couldn't we go to the Supreme Court and let's have the conversation? We're not discovering non-Christian people here. We've had opportunities to be Christianized, and many of our people are Christianized and many are not. So, you know, anyways, that doctrine just would not apply any longer in rulings of our lands today, in rulings of sacred sites and sacred places, in trust lands, and on of issues that are the pipeline coming through on land. You know, we have a lot of issues coming up, and they eventually find their way into the Supreme Court. So the whole idea that we thought, why couldn't we go to the Supreme Court and let them know we're coming now, and where we might funnel judgments and decrees today, instead of looking back on a Christian doctrine of discovery. And then this thing of advocacy too, mascots. That was a big thing. I got really involved in that. I'm still involved in it. The state of Tennessee is very backward. Several years ago, when we had the Commission on Indian Affairs, we wrote a resolution and presented it through the legislation of the state of Tennessee, and we were really beat up about that over mascots in public schools. They receive federal funds, they receive fundings for other things, you know, pertaining to public schools. And we said, we, the Native communities, there's no tribes in the state of Tennessee, and there isn't going to be, they've been removed. So, but there's large Indian peoples from all tribes, all different, you know, 566 federally recognized tribes, and I believe that number is even changing this year probably. So we come from all tribes, and we do have we end up in urban settings, and we end up in places away from our tribes and our, quote, reservations, or however you want to say that. So, but we still don't, we put up to Tennessee about the issue of mascot. And we didn't ask about everything, but we asked in public schools for them to give up their American Indian mascots. So being a Methodist, that was in some of our resolutions from General Conference years ago, and they still pull it out every now and then about not meeting in areas where you have teams. You know, Illinois is giving up Chief Wahoo finally, and so we don't want to meet there until they do give up their Indian name. It's a justice issue, especially if you've asked them to. So here in the state of Tennessee, we ask that they give up the use of Native American symbols, culture, and names in public schools. It was almost ridiculous, the response. We had a representative from East Tennessee that wrote his own resolution to put ours back, and he used some pretty racist language, and he had to drop it because, oh, we're never going to give up our Chief Wahoo clothes, sort of speaking. You are going to be our mascot forever. And our culture does not have anything to do with playing football, baseball, any other thing, because why? We're real people. And we have said we don't want to be your mascot. And we still don't want to be your mascot, but who listens to us? We're only Indians, right? So here we go again. Maybe it goes back to, and I believe a lot of the issues we still have today here on our own land is due to the doctrine of discovery. We will forever be discovered and never have a mind or a thought of our own without that idea of we were discovered when we were here for thousands of years. Thousands and thousands of years we were here. So the mascot is still an ongoing issue. There's still Redskins, Washington, D.C., Redskins, and that in itself is a disparaging name. But I will say here in the state of Tennessee, a group of us, which included Navajos, Cherokees, and then myself, Muscogee, we went to Martin Methodist College. That they used to be the Indians. I don't know if you knew that or not. And we wrote them. Well, actually, we got in trouble. The first time we said, we took it to our annual conference here, and we asked for Martin Methodist to give up their Indian name because that was language of the church. Well, the bishop at that time, and I've since forgotten who that was, he got angry and told us that we couldn't read that at the annual conference here. And I got upset. I said, why? It's church history. I just came back from general conference and we just put it in the book of discipline. Why? It's exactly the same words. Why? Well, it was like this. You will not read it. The morning we were going to read that at the annual conference of the United Methodist Church here in the state of Tennessee. We're down in Brentwood. And so I said, okay, well, that's awful. I mean, I was real upset and, where does this lead? So then the next year, the co-sponsor was a minister. He said, Melba, you have anything you want to say this year? And I said, no, I don't want to say anything after that. She said, well, why don't you bring that up again? I thought, well, I don't know. So what we did, and which was probably better thought out, we wrote to Martin Methodist College. We asked for a time to talk to the president of the college. And so we took a delegation there, and he was very, very nice. I think it was, the principal or the dean of school was, I think his name was Brown at that time. He was very nice, and he invited us in, and we had a long discussion, and he said he was always aware of the sensitivity of the name, but, he was just aware of it. So one of our members who was Navajo, he says, well, what took you so long to change the name? Why didn't you change it? So the president had nothing to say back to us. So as it happened, they did proceed to change the name. Because in our resolution at General Conference, we'd asked that all Methodist schools would change their name, would give up their Indian name. So they gave up the Indians, and I have really forgotten. I think they're the Redbirds or something like that. I'm really not sure now. It's been so long ago, but so we did have a success. And baby steps are real when it comes to advocacy. And I've learned a lesson. It's a diplomatic kind of thing. It's not something you can scream and holler and stand on your head and expect anybody to listen to you, because they're not. They just walk on by and say, look at that crazy person over there acting. So, I think quiet protest still says the legislation, which Senator Wamp from Tennessee got that legislation through the Congress for the marking of the trails of tears through the state of Tennessee and other places, came through the Cherokee. So, of course, on the board of the Trail of Tears, the 5 tribes are represented. And of course, we all have removal trails. So what is happening is more of the other tribes, which I'm another tribe. I'm Muscogee-Creek, so our tribe is, of course, coming in to say, hey, this is interesting. We need to mark where our people walked. And so there's a lot of research is involved in all of this. So through the Cherokee Nation, and here in Tennessee, the Trail of Tears came through 39 counties in the state of Tennessee. That's quite a lot. And of course, we have different, I'm not an authority on it because I am Creek, so I more or less pay attention to my tribal entity. However, I can kind of talk about what we do in Tennessee. And so I'm a member of the Tennessee chapter of the Trail of Tears and the Alabama chapter of the Trail of Tears. So I maintain those two. And then I even thought about joining Oklahoma, but I thought, well, we have to get there first. So the work is here. And so here in the state of Tennessee, on the Northern Trail, which of course comes right down McMinnville, Woodbury, down through Murfreesboro, up through Nashville, and then on up into Kentucky and on Illinois, and then back down, and finally into Oklahoma. So that's the Northern Trail. And a lot of people don't know, but the Muscogee people were rounded up from Chattanooga and taken to Blythe's Ferry Landing, which is isn't that Dayton, Tennessee, near Cleveland, Tennessee. And then they left from there on their Trail of Tears. And so the Muscogee people walked with the Cherokees on the Northern Trail. Well, that's my people were with them. So in the state of Tennessee, most people do not even mention that the Creeks were here. Like, Pinson Mound is a Muskogee site. These big mounds are Muskogean. And then we have the language of Middle, we have the language of Woodland, we have the language of Mississippian. And of course there's lots of us, because we're kin to each other. The Choctaws, the Chickasaw, Muskogees, we're kind of kindreds in that Mississippian culture. But in particular, there are certain things that distinguish the Muscogee people from others. And I'm not an archaeologist, so I can't really speak to that. I have heard and I've read a little, not a lot, because it's just a lot to read, I don't want to be here till in my afterlife reading on these things. But so one way that is really interesting to me, and I think maybe to others, is how our ancestors were buried. And then, of course, funerary objects. This would be the key to what cultures, because there was a period of time where we didn't say we're Creeks or and of course, by the way, Creek is not our word for us. It was the non-Indian people called us the Creeks because we lived by water. And being from the South, people would say, we'll see you tomorrow if the creeks don't rise. They did not mean the water. They meant the Indians. We're very jealous of our land, very jealous. Very, we had our land stolen through Congress. And in 1824 and 1825, Secretary of State Henry Clay said, there's no full bloods that can be civilized. And then he said, furthermore, the Indians are not a race worth preserving. So these are facts, and they were written down. And you know, in the background is, of course, Andrew Jackson. It was before his presidency, but he still did like Indians. And he fought the Creeks in the Creek War, 1813. And so it was just, you know, the only way he could get Alabama, 23 million acres of land, was to do away with the Indians, to break their power. And so he went down through the Coosa Valley, burning every town and murdering. I have to say it that way because this is my people. Other people may not say it quite as crudely, but since you ask, that's what happened. And so the Creek War are facts. And you know, he actually was supposed to be fighting the British, not us. He was on his way to New Orleans to be the hero of New Orleans. But on his way there, he fought the Creek War. Took full advantage of a civil dispute between our tribal entities, which, by the way, was a big thing. But he did take advantage, and he did burn every town, every store of food from Tennessee to Mobile. So it was a long way. And so you could read about the Creek War, or maybe you know something about it. But anyways, the Trail of Tears, all of this maneuvering, the Creeks lost their lands in Georgia. They ended up in Alabama. Then, of course, the chaos that pursued afterwards was just very horrendous and a horrible sense of history, and not very well talked about because it was so horrible. And it went on for quite, like I was saying, my great-great-grandmother on my grandmother's side she self-immigrated, and she came into Indian Territory in 1840 or 38, but they say they think it was 1840. And she was to receive a pay for self-immigration. Well, she died before she received that money. You would receive payout for self-immigration and pay for 1 year of subsistence while you were getting organized and resettled. She never received a penny of that money, and her heir was her daughter, which was my great-grandmother. And I'm not sure if she received her money because she died 1872. So what I'm thinking, that as heir, that payout went to my grandfather. I haven't really, still looking at that because I don't exactly know the year that she died. But she was the heir to her mother's payout for the removal. And so the last payout to the Muscogee people was 1870. So if you look at the Trail of Tears, it started about 1828. The first McIntosh left 1828, 29, 30, 36, 38, 40. I mean, it was just a mass, continual migration of the Muscogee people as things became worse and worse, and finally the only hope was to migrate. So when you mark the Trail of Tears here in Tennessee, and my hope is, and I've been working with Culture Preservation, Muscogee-Creek Nation, the Cherokee Removal Park down in Dayton, Tennessee, which is Blythe's Ferry Landing, there is hardly any recognition of the Muscogee people that were held there. So our goal is this year, and hopefully we can get it done this year. We've been slow to get that done. And while we've been slow, the park has gone straight ahead with gobs of stuff down there. And so it's very highly over the top Cherokee, which when I go in there, I go, and that's not to despair the Cherokee, but if you're telling a story about that place, you need to be inclusive of the truth. And to not even bring up the creeks that were there would hardly be telling the truth. So I have been, for these years, the Creek Indian that's been telling you, we were here, we left from here. You know, we were rounded up. Chattanooga is a Creek word. We were rounded up from here. The Uchis, the Quisatis, the Hijitis, the Muscogee-Eads, we were all here, and that's under the Confederacy of the Muscogee-Creek Nation today. And see, with that legislation, there was nothing done on the Trail of Tears history. So in the short period of time, I think 20 years of the National Trail of Tears organizations, they have made great progress. They have written books of research. They have documented research. Families have gotten their research and they've documented them. I just went to the conference and they talked about the missions of the Cherokees from the Board of Missions in New England that came all the way down here to Alabama and to Tennessee. And they were the first missions here to the Cherokees. Well, the book that I just recently got, 3 people did the research. They have the schools, they even have the students' names and the list of students, and they tell a marvelous history. So marking those trails is very important. That's something nobody would probably even think about. So we have that done now. We're doing more. People are more and more every year. It's very exciting, you know, to see these documents in the history being, I mean, we're talking just down the road here, you know, Ross Landing, Dayton and Cleveland, Tennessee, you know, Red Clay, the last capital. You know, we're talking it's just right across the border into another state. So these are real places. They're real historical places, and they tell New Echota, they tell the story of the people who were removed by an act of Congress, our ancient homelands taken away, and absolutely ethnic cleansing of the people to remove all those people. So in the state of Tennessee and in Alabama, our names are there. You can go to Oklahoma and Nuyaka and Eufaula and all those kind of Coweta, all those names, Takabachi, they're all here in the southeast. But they're also in Oklahoma, which tells the story that when we left, we named our towns again in Oklahoma. So the marking the trail here is a very exciting idea, and I would just recommend, especially to students who are studying history, you should join the Trail of Tears organization. You might learn something you didn't have to pay college tuition to learn it. But on the other side of it, you also can contribute the knowledge that you're learning. So I would really, see, I didn't join until, I've been a member of the Trail of Tears about 5 years when I could have been a member for 20. Doggone it, I missed out. But it has been an amazing trip, and I'm just so happy that we have that. So I would encourage everybody to get involved with the Trail of Tears. It's so important, that part of history. And of course, here in the state of Tennessee, it's probably more important than anything because of Andrew Jackson, you know. He didn't want those stories to be told. And he tried to say, well, I'm trying to save the Indians by sending them west. No. That isn't the story. The story is the state of Alabama. At the end of the Creek War, with the forced treaty of Fort Jackson, 23 million acres of fertile, cleared land was set aside for slavery, land speculation. And then we have the rest of the story of the South. But they had to get rid of the Indians first. You know, Alabama's a pretty big state. Georgia's a pretty big state. When you get rid of those Indians, those problems, what are we going to do with these Indians? The problem of the Indian problem, you get them out of the way, then you're free to speculate and to use that land. And so at that time, slavery was the thing. It's awful to think that our land was turned from the beloved land that it was into human suffering of slavery. So, it is hard for a Creek citizen to live in the land, in the state of Tennessee. With Andrew, I always say, living in the shadow of Andrew Jackson. And so there's lots to be said around that story. The Trail of Tears is a really important part of American history. This is an old mound and religious sacred place here. So this is a sacred site, and it's obviously being preserved, and students are working hard to make sure that up-to-date information is being given. So I want to encourage everyone who hears this tape to look at these sacred places and to remember the people that were here and take full advantage of learning about them. And then as time marched on, we're still here, and the trails tell our story. And these parks, like this place here, tells that story. And so it's very needed. And we have the Department of Interior, which deals with so many fundings, and we can get into another whole aspects of that. But historical preservation is important, and keeping them as near as they were is important. So don't pick up the dirt or the flour. I mean, it's hard to believe that, but this was a sacred place and needs to be renewed.